Great. Well, thank you very much, David, for inviting me. It was really a wonderful opportunity to come to Liverpool, which I've never been to before, and come to this university and be part of the seminar series, which is just such a fantastic thing that you've got. The fact that you have an engaged series, that we can actually have these kinds of conversations in. So what I'm going to do today is talk about the Minutes of Evidence project. And we've got a little take-home for you, Lee. You can take one of our lovely bookmarks, which has all our partners on the back and sort of a take-home message about the project. I'm going to be talking about what the project is about, how it came to be, the basis of the engagement and collaboration of the project, and the different aspects of it, being education, research, performance, and engagement and collaboration. And I'll also be showing you some excerpts from the performance, the verbatim performance piece, which is at the heart of the project. So the Minutes of Evidence project is very much, as we have up here, about sparking conversations about history and structural justice. And that's really one of the most exciting parts of our project, is that it is a collaboration, and it's a collaboration in many different ways. So as researchers, we come from different disciplines. So we are criminologists, lawyers, socio-legal scholars, and historians. So we come together, and even though that seems like, well, okay, that would work together quite well, what's been quite enriching about the project is our different disciplinary perspectives, and really trying to figure out this question of structural justice and structural injustice from where we're coming from. And really for us as lawyers and criminologists, really understanding the importance of history and the past to understanding the present and then going forward to the future. So that's very much at the core of the project, is how we understand the past, what that means for our present, for the continuing injustices as well as the potentials, the just alternatives, and what that might mean for future structural justice. So the Minutes of Evidence project is very much about creating new and collaborative ways of understanding Australia's past and engaging with structural justice. And I've got a website here that you can go to later, and I'll try and show you a bit of that as well in today's presentation. What we're doing is very much a collaborative enterprise. So we're bringing together leading Indigenous and non-Indigenous performance artists, researchers, education experts and community members to promote new modes of publicly engaging with historical and structural injustice through research, education, performance, and engagement and collaboration underlie all of this. What we're very interested in doing is creating these meeting points. So the project is very much based around these meeting points that we do create through theatre, universities, schools, public spaces, and through research, to really act as a catalyst for establishing awareness and possibilities, to create these conversations, to create this appreciation awareness of what the historical injustices, the structural injustices of the past, particularly in relation to Australia, but we also we use this model to look at other cases as well in relation to the past, present and future. And what we do is draw on the minutes of evidence, the transcript of a particular inquiry, the 1881 parliamentary inquiry into the Kurz Aboriginal Reserve in Victoria, and the then colony of Victoria in Australia. And I'll be talking more about that and why this particular inquiry, what we're doing with this particular inquiry to do all of this. Now we have a number of partners and investigators who work together on this project. So I thought I'd put that list up for you there. The University of Melbourne is the host organisation. The lead CI is Associate Professor Julie Evans, a criminological colleague of mine, and I'll sort of look at the researchers in a moment. And we have 13 partner organisations, which has been the key to the project, in that we're really gathering expertise and we're doing it as a collaboration. So what we're doing is what our partners really would need in their particular spheres to be doing. So we're facilitating new curriculum for the education department. They identified a need that there's no adequate curriculum for Indigenous Aboriginal history and understanding the particular history of Aboriginal activism, petitioning in Australia, particularly in Victoria. So we've facilitated the establishment of new curriculum for secondary school students, and I'll be talking about that today as well. Vic Health was very much concerned with the promotion of anti-racism and creating these spaces, these meeting points. They were a major funder for our website, for example. They see that as a very important enduring legacy of the project. Victorian Aboriginal Education Association has been a key partner, of course, with the development of the curriculum, and that's been a very exciting aspect for them, and they're already looking, and we're trying to help them to look at new models for other communities, because they saw how this worked for this particular community, for the Coranderrk community, and they want that to happen elsewhere. They're saying, well, my grandchildren are in this particular community, can you do something for that? Well, we can't. The project has a start and end date, but what we've done is put some money towards that to investigate possible new projects and new models that they might like to use in a number of different communities in Victoria. La Mama Theatre has been the producer of the verbatim performance piece, and it's been a very strong partner throughout. They're an independent theatre company in Melbourne, in Carlton near the university, and this has been their most popular, always sold out performance, which also says something about the need for this particular performance. Ilbidjeri Theatre Company is the leading Indigenous theatre company. They were the original, they took carriage of this originally, and they have also founded a very important project for themselves. The Koori Heritage Trust works a lot with stolen generation in Victoria, so their clients are people who are taken from their families as babies or children, and they're constantly reporting back to us how important this particular process and this piece of theatre has been important for their clients to actually have a sense of recognition, have a sense of appreciation of what they've been through, and have their descendants' voices actually put on stage. And I'll be playing you a piece, just a very short excerpt from one of the actors, Greg Fryer, who was a member of the Stolen Generations, and the importance of how important this process has been for him. Arts Victoria, Regional Arts Victoria, State Library Victoria have all been important in different ways. Deakin University, we have one of our historians is from there, and Royal Holloway University of London, University of Sussex have also been broadening out this project to look not just at Australia, but settler colonialism and colonialism more broadly. We've also importantly had partner investigators from some of our key organisations, so Liz Jones from La Mama, Rachel Mazza from Ilbidjeri, Erin Birch from the Department of Education, and Jenny Bates from the Koori Heritage Trust. And Giordano Nani and Andrea James have been the writers for the play Coranderrk, We Will Show the Country, and Giordano was our research fellow for the most of the project, and it was him actually finding this particular transcript, the minutes of evidence of the 1881 inquiry, while he was doing his PhD work. He was doing something quite different, and he came across that in the archives. And he went to Julie Evans, who was his supervisor, and said, I think this would make a fantastic piece of theatre. And so it was that initial conversation, and Julie then bringing a number of us all together. So Julie and I had been involved in the PhD supervision with Diane Otto from the law school, who was originally very involved in the project. And our supervision had been around transitional justice, and she started thinking, well, transitional justice doesn't really address settler colonialism, so we started talking about that. That was sort of the beginnings of the project. Mason McMillan then came on board, a criminologist, does a lot of work on international justice. Mark McMillan, an Indigenous lawyer from the law school. And so it snowballed. So it's been a very organic process about having conversations both with our partner investigators as well as between researchers. So our research team, as I've mentioned, is Julie, myself, Nathan, Mark, and Pat Grimshaw from the University of Melbourne, eminent historian who's been really critical to helping us on the project, Joe Cruikshank from Deakin University, Alan Lester from University of Sussex, and Zoe Laidlaw from Royal Holloway. Giordano Nani is the senior research fellow. We've also a really innovative aspect in terms of the research of the project has been the establishment of early career Indigenous researcher projects. So originally we had money to establish a PhD for an Indigenous researcher, and we actually advertised a couple of times. But one of the issues that we found was that no one was able to take it up on a full-time basis. And what we needed to do was actually invest time and energy in Indigenous researchers at a much earlier stage. So in order to enable them and give them the structural basis in order to potentially apply for PhDs if they so wished. So we put the money that was going to go towards a PhD to these early career Indigenous researcher grants. So Lily Brown, Simone Griswold, Olivia Slater and Kari Walker have all taken on these. And so, for example, Lily and Kari have been doing really important work around what is it that teachers in high schools are afraid of in terms of teaching Indigenous history and about Indigenous justice and injustice. Like, there is this block, and part of it is that we just don't, in Australia and most likely elsewhere, we don't get taught it very well. So when I was at school, we were taught about boomerangs, we were taught a lot about settler history, and I had to do this project where I had to kind of burn the paper and make it all look all, like old worldy and pretend I was a settler woman somewhere in the outback. But we don't, and there might have been some, boomerang throwing at some stage, but we don't do it very well, and we still don't do Indigenous education about our broader history, about our history of collaboration and history of injustice and of genocide, and we just don't do that well. And so Lily and Kari have been looking at what teachers need, what they're afraid of, what they need from us. And so and Simone did work around Indigenous overrepresentation in prisons, and Olivia did work around performance. And these have been really key aspects to the project and the research focus of the project to enable these to have these as core components of the Minutes of Evidence project. So I just want to play you just a couple of minutes from Greg Fryer. Greg has been an actor in Corranderk Blue Show The Country with the particular, and I'll talk more about the verbatim performance, but it's always been Indigenous actors and non-Indigenous actors working together, and usually around 9 actors. We've tried to keep, or La Mama and Ilbidjeri have tried to keep the same actors involved where possible, but sometimes it's not possible due to their scheduling commitments. But they always want to be involved, and that's what we find when we've had Q&As after the performance, and that this particular performance means a great deal to them and to all the actors involved, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And so I just wanted to play you a couple of minutes from Greg.
Just recently I actually went home at age 48 and to the Northern Territory, but that wouldn't have been possible without this community in Victoria, which embraced me, gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of respect and place and stuff, and took ownership of my culture, if you like. And so it is very close. Of course, a lot of those names that have come up in it, like Wanderns, Charles, Briggs, I know all the descendants of those people and their families I've had relationships with or worked with those various clans and nations.
Are you satisfied with Mr. Harris?
Mr. Harris and Mr. Green are now stationed to be under the Chief Secretary. No board at all. Oh, look, I think this particular one's good in the verbatim type thing, which I actually wasn't aware of, even being an acting artist, until I got involved in this. And it's an incredible process to actually take you back from modernity and chuck you back there then where you're a voyeur and you can sit and watch what it was. And even us, when we were looking at what I suppose you call Hansard from the Inquiry and stuff, to actually see it verbatim, to go, what, do you think the mixed blood won't reduce your intelligence, and things like that, and you go, oh, they actually thought that was the mindset back then. And that's quite often, we get a lot of laughter in those moments when we put it on stage, but it is humorous now. But again, this whole process, for me, it can actually take you back to experience what it was like that time, the good and the bad. You have people like Anne Bond, for example. I never knew people of such fortitude and strength existed back then who actually went in and wanted to help us. So I've learned a lot out of this too.
Great. So there are 4 aspects to the project. Firstly, we have education. So we're using the inquiry, the 1881 Parliamentary Inquiry, to support the development of new curriculum in secondary schools. And not only new curriculum in secondary schools, we're also supporting the development of protocols for implementing the curriculum. So when you want to teach this in your schools, when you're going to teach it to your years 9 and 10 secondary school students, what do? Who do you contact? You contact the local Aboriginal community. There are certain protocols that you need to go through in order to teach this material. So we're supporting the development of this new curriculum using the 1881 Inquiry as a prism to look at the issues of justice, of injustice, of resistance, of collaboration. Performance. The performance, as you would have gathered from now, is a really key aspect of the project. So this is a verbatim theatre production which is based on the minutes of evidence of the 1881 Inquiry. So the minutes of evidence are 141 pages of literally the transcript. So it's Commissioner asked this, the respondent answered this. And what's unusual about this particular inquiry, this parliamentary inquiry, is that you actually had quite a few Aboriginal people giving testimony. So there were plenty of inquiries, as many of you would know, throughout the Empire. Many inquiries which were ostensibly about addressing the harms and injustices, but mostly were about moving on and really not addressing the structure at all, addressing the structural concerns at all. And they generally didn't elicit testimony from Aboriginal peoples who were most affected. What was unusual was that this inquiry heard from 23 Aboriginal people. So this was quite unusual in that they heard from men, women and one child who gave testimony, often at really a great personal risk to themselves, because by speaking out they could clearly be removed, and this was often their second or third home. And as I'll speak about in a moment, Correndon was extremely important to them. So the performance is a verbatim theatre production, so it's using the actual minutes of evidence, the transcript. It's also using other materials from around the time, so it's using petitions, the petitions that the community submitted to the colony of Victoria, to the governor. It's using letters that they wrote to the inquiry and also elsewhere, and as well as the transcript. So it's a combination of all of these primary materials from the time. So it's a verbatim theatre production based on the materials from and around the 1881 inquiry. It's also, as I've been speaking about, has got a research and research training dimension. So as researchers, we're very much interested in and understanding what is structural injustice and what might a structural justice look like. So, as I said, this sort of came from an interest in transitional justice, in this kind of these methods of using law to address harms of the past, with the kind of post-conflict societies. It got us thinking about how does it address colonialism, post-colonialism, and we're thinking more broadly now around how do we understand and appreciate structural injustice. So the structural injustice of colonialism and settler colonialism that, as Patrick Wolfe, an Australian historian, has noted, that we need to understand it more as structure, not as event. So if we think about these harms as structural harms, then they continue. And if we look today at the position of Aboriginal peoples in Australia, we look at the high imprisonment rates, we look at the terrible health statistics, we look at the discourse around Aboriginal peoples, and then we look back to the advent of settler colonialism, and we can see that this is the most interesting, exciting part about the mode in which we're doing this project, is that we actually have that replayed to us in a theatre performance. We can then see the continuities between the past and the present. And we can think about, well, what might a future justice look like if we're going to actually understand and appreciate the structural harms and the structural harms of settler colonialism and colonialism more generally. The position of Aboriginal people, the denial of sovereignty, the way in which Aboriginal peoples are seen outside of governance. So we see, for example, with the Northern Territory intervention in 2007, with the suspension of the Racial Discrimination Act, and the use of the Australian Army, we see great parallels to the way in which Aboriginal peoples are governed, to the original governance and the original dispossession. So the research is very much then about the relationship between structural injustice and structural justice, and how understanding the relationship between the colonial past and the present can inform a just future. So it's very much about making those connections between the past and the present and the future. And as I mentioned, including these training and publication opportunities for early career Indigenous researchers. And at the heart of the project is that we have been hoping that we are establishing a kind of model for future engagement and collaboration. That this is a project people can look at and say, okay, I don't have to do it exactly this way, but this is how they did it, these are the steps they took, and this might be something that we can do in different ways and in different locations. And so engagement and collaboration have been key to the development of the project, and we hope to its future as well. The project really responded, and its impetus was two key recommendations in two inquiries in Australia, the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody and the 1997 Bringing Them Home reports. So the two recommendations that they both had was the need to educate the broader population about Aboriginal history and the need to redress the full range of entrenched disadvantages, which we can understand as structural injustice arising from that history, widespread and long-term change. Structural justice, as we understand it, is to take place. So this was how we framed the project, and this is very much about it being its impetus, that, as I mentioned, that there is very little education about Aboriginal history and collaboration. So we see what's really interesting about the inquiry, the 1881 inquiry, is that both displays the injustices of the time, but also displays the collaboration that existed between Europeans and Indigenous peoples. And this is something that's very little known. Also, it's little known the resistance that Aboriginal people partook in, and the strategies that they employed in order to fight settler colonialism and their dispossession. So the project is very much responding to previous inquiries in Australia and their recommendation about the need for education and the need to redress the full range of entrenched disadvantages in relation to long-term structural and widespread change. I just thought I'd put this up briefly to show you, I mean, we've got this on the website, I've sort of redone it a little bit for here, but the genealogy of the project. And each year we have sort of a set of outcomes that we've achieved on the website. We also have a genealogy of the project. And it's just useful, I think, to see that how we went about it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that Julian Giordano in 2009 first discussed the prospect of staging the minutes of evidence of the Coranderrk Parliamentary Inquiry. Giordano then went and had a conversation with Auntie Jo Murphy Wandon, who is from Wurundjeri people, about the prospect of restaging this, and she was very enthusiastic and has been continued to be enthusiastic about this. We then had the bringing together of the Melbourne University project team, so lots of conversations, lots and lots of emails, lots of meetings. And we also, at the same time, were commencing conversations around the staging of a play with stakeholders and future partners, so with La Mama, with Obidjeri, and the Department of Education in Victoria. And we got seed funding from the University of Melbourne to develop the performance aspect of the project, which happened in 2010. So in 2010, there was a workshop with Andrea James, a Yorta Yorta playwright, together with Giordano, with 9 actors, which culminated in the pilot reading of Coranderrk, where we show the country. And these were really exciting. This was a very exciting event. In fact, for many of us, this is our favourite performance, because it was, you know, in the theatre world, this is a pilot reading. It's not really seen as real theatre because everyone's standing there holding their scripts. But for us to be sitting there and seeing this minutes of evidence being brought to life and the impact that theatre can have on understanding and creating the space was quite fantastic. And certainly Patricia Grimshaw, one of the key historians on the project, who's Emeritus Professor at the University of Melbourne, she said she's read, and she's an eminent colonial historian, she has read this minutes of evidence so many times, and until she saw it performed, it just didn't have that impact. And it was extraordinary to have the actors reading this performance and but still creating this incredible space of awareness, of anger, of understanding, of frustration, of possibility. It was a very, very exciting 4 pilot readings, which were held at the Mama Courthouse Theatre in Melbourne. And so then in 2010 we had that. We had further consultation engagement, which was driven by 2 of our partner investigators, Rachel Mazza from Obidjeri and Jenny Bates from the Korean Heritage Trust, with local Indigenous community members in Melbourne and Healesville. We had meetings with potential partners, including Vic Health and Department of Education and Training came on board. We had meetings as well with the Department of Justice, and went very, very far. In the end, they just couldn't come on board. We then put in an application for funding with the Australian Research Council, with our 13 partner organisations, including the University of Melbourne, and it was awarded the following year. So the following year, The project itself formally began, but we have been working on it quite intensively from 2009. And it ends formally in the middle of this year, 2016. Will be certainly the funding wraps up at the end, in the middle of this year, but the project in many aspects will be continuing. So it's probably time to tell you a little bit about the Corranderk Aboriginal Reserve and about where it is and what some of the issues here were. So as I mentioned, the focus of the project is the 1881 Parliamentary Inquiry. Corranderk, as you can see on the top map, is apparently it's about 120 kilometres from Melbourne, Melbourne being the capital of Victoria. There's a map of Australia at the top for you, so you can see where we are, and you can see Corranderk there. At the bottom, you can see how it is along the Yarra River. It's a beautiful area of the world. And the Yarra in Melbourne is very muddy and not very nice, but the Yarra out there, the Yarra River is gorgeous. It's a beautiful country out there, and very, very close to Healesville, which is a sort of mid-level town in that area. So this, and this is a photo of the Corranderk residence at Corranderk itself. It's a photo that we've got up on our website. It's properly attributed there. It was the Corranderk Reserve was established in 1863, 50 years after the advent of settler colonialism in the colony of Victoria. It was established by surviving members of different clans who'd been dispossessed from their land, and in the face of this increasing occupation of their lands, the Aboriginal peoples developed a strategy of resistance in terms of and adaptation by petitioning government officials for land that they could settle on. So a number of delegations were made, firstly by Simon Wonga and then by William Barak, to government officials to actually get land to settle on. So they did get land at a place called Acheron, but then they were removed from there, and then they successfully petitioned to get this land at Corranderk. And they were initially given a reserve, a grant of 930 hectares, which was extended to almost 2,000 hectares a couple of years later. So they established this reserve, this station, in 1863. And it was at Corranderk, beside the Yarra River in Healesville, Victoria. And so it was one of 6 reserves that was eventually established in the colony of Victoria, which were presided over by missionaries and the Board of Protection for Aborigines, who were in charge, completely in charge of everything to do with Aboriginal people's lives, whether they could leave a station, go to another station. They were the ones who were in charge of removal of children. And they had their eye on Corranderk because Corranderk became an extremely successful station. So it was John Green, a missionary, was the manager, and he had a fantastically respectful relationship with the people of Corranderk. They farmed cattle, they grew vegetables, and they grew hops. And they won first prize at the Melbourne Show for their hops. They were very, very successful. And so the Board of Protection and settlers, known as squatters in the area, started eyeing off the land. They wanted that land because it was so successful. And the Board of Protection wouldn't fence the land. So for 20 years they were farming and they couldn't get fences put round the land, so cattle would go off and so on. So clearly that wasn't helping in productivity, but they wouldn't do that. But so the Board of Protection, and you'll see this in John Green's testimony later, they forced John Green, who was the manager of the station. They installed the Reverend Strickland, who did not have a relationship of respect with the Aboriginal peoples of Corranderk, and a harsh regime ensued. He really neglected their needs, the needs of the stations and the residents. So there was a real set of a process of petitioning and resistance then ensued. So the people of the Corranderk residents, led by William Barak, petitioned the Governor of Victoria. So they walked at least 4 times from Corranderk to Melbourne, so 120 kilometres each way, to present their petition. So you see here one of the petitions here, and that they presented. And they were successful through this petitioning in having an inquiry established. So the 1881 inquiry came about because Aboriginal peoples from Coranduk actually petitioned, and they so-called agitated for it, and that was the language that was used at the time. So it was talked about as the Coranduk Rebellion. And in the inquiry, there's all this innuendo about, well, surely, you know, there was this, they were agitating. It was the people of, they're too close to Hillsville, they're too close to the city, you know, all these crazy ideas are being put into their heads as if the Aboriginal people couldn't have these ideas themselves. Well, actually, things are not being, we are not being able to do what we need to do here, and we need change. So we see in that final petition, this was the claim that was presented to the inquiry, that we want the board and the inspector, Captain Page, to be no longer over us. We want only one man here, and that is Mr. John Green, and the station to be under the Chief Secretary. Then we will show the country that the station could self-support itself. So this was the key claim. So on the one hand, what's also really interesting about this inquiry is that, yes, it was about the management of the station. It was about the fact that there were not enough blankets, there was not enough food, that there was no fencing. But it was also the space that was carved out within this inquiry was about, well, actually, we want sovereignty, we want self-determination, we want to be able to do this ourselves. And we can do this ourselves. We've shown you we can. You just got to let us do it. This is our home now. This is the space we have. You've taken us from our other lands. Let us be here. Let us farm the land. Let us show the country. So that's where clearly the title of the performance comes from. We will show the country. Coranduk, we will show the country. So the inquiry was held in 1881 over a period of 2.5 months. They held 10 hearings, and they held 3 of those at Coranduk itself. And they had 10 commissioners, including one woman whose name was Anne Bond, who was a great supporter of the Coranduk residents, and you'll see this in the testimony from William Barak, and that she very much supported the residents. So the inquiry was held over 2.5 months, resulting in this minutes of evidence in this transcript. So why the 1881 parliamentary inquiry? Why do we focus on this? Well, I've given you quite a few explanations thus far. Firstly, this long history of Aboriginal activism in Victoria is really relatively unknown. So when we're creating this space of awareness and understanding, we want to clearly have a space of appreciation of the horrific injustices and the structural injustices. But we also want to show the agency of Aboriginal people, and that there was this long history of Aboriginal activism, of adaptation, of petitioning, of resistance. And this has also sustained Aboriginal peoples to this day, and this strategy continues to this day. So this is relatively unknown. So actually putting that out there through education, through performance, through research, through public forums is a really key aspect of what we're doing. The 1881 inquiry is also relatively unknown. The fact that 23 Aboriginal men, women and children gave evidence, that there were settler supporters, so people like John Green, Anne Bond, George Syme, people who supported the Aboriginal residents at Coranduk, and actually saw another way forward. And so this space is carved out in this inquiry to things could be otherwise. And clearly the particular role of the Board for the Protection of Aboriginal is the discourse of racism, of governance, of colonialism, as elucidated by people like Edward Kurz. So the 1881 inquiry is relatively unknown, and so in a way what we're doing through performance and education is this hidden story is being reactivated, and this is another aspect of what we're doing, and we do it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the research towards the end. But this has been a really exciting aspect of the research as well, thinking about ways in which this record of law gets hidden, and then how we might actually be able to reactivate that and make that appreciable, and what can happen alongside then the record of law. Collaboration as well between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people is also relatively unknown, and so this is another aspect that we're highlighting with this. The Board for Protection should actually continue doing what they're doing and doing a great job. But the dominant report, we can say, did find for the key claim, which was that the station was not as well managed as it could be. And Strickland was removed. Green was not reinstated. But then In 1886, so just a few years later, what's known as the Aborigines Protection Act, which we know as the Half-Caste Act, was brought into force. So the Board for Protection of Aborigines lobbied for this, which was basically meant that the station was broken up through other means. So anyone who was so-called half-caste had to leave, children had to go and be housed in orphanages and schools. Men, women and children were directed to seek elsewhere. The board noted in its 1884 report, from the earliest period of their recollection, they may be accustomed to regard themselves as members of the community at large and may not be constrained to carry with them through life the impression of the indolent habits and manner of their original black friends. So this was the impetus, this was the underlying agenda of the assimilation and destruction of the Board for Protection. But the Coranderrk residents petitioned again, and they put forward a new petition that we Aboriginals all wish and hope to have freedom, not to be bound down by the protection of the board, as it says in the bill, Clause 5, but we should be free like the law of corporation. So let's, I just want to run through some of the aspects, the other aspects of the project now. So engagement and collaboration, as we've mentioned, is building relationships through collaborative engagement has been key to this project. So ongoing consultation with local Indigenous community members in Melbourne and Hillsville, which has been overseen by some of our key partners, both for the development of the verbatim theatre production and the development of the teacher resource package. We've had biannual project management meetings with all partners and regular subcommittee meetings and performance public engagement and education aspects. And a couple of years ago at the State Library, one of our partners, we ran a very successful public forum called Just Encounters, bringing together education, arts and research. So this was a forum where we invited all our partners to speak, and it ran for the whole day, and we had different sessions on education, arts and research, and the bringing together of that. And you can find on our website the video of that particular day. The performance, as I've mentioned, uses the transcripts, the minutes of evidence from the 1881 parliamentary inquiry, together with excerpts from letters, petitions and newspaper articles. And it's been written by Giordano Nanni and Andrea James, where they distilled this 141 pages into an 80-minute performance. No mean feat, so it's quite extraordinary. And then we've had many seasons at the Mama Theatre in Melbourne. We've had it on country at Coranderrk. Most recently on February the 21st, we had it on country at Coranderrk, which was very much run by the descendants of Coranderrk residents, and they're working to rejuvenate the land at Coranderrk. It was a really successful outdoor performance with 500 people out there. Had it at Federation Square in Melbourne, at the Sydney Opera House for a few days, and a really fantastic tour to Victorian schools and community centres, which has been really key to remember that beautifully. A key feature has always been the Q&A, question and answers afterwards, so we haven't had that at every performance. It's a theatrical thing. It's always been interesting, the connection between the researchers and the theatre people, what you can do, what you can't do. But we've had it every few performances. Although the last season, actually, we had it every performance, which was fantastic. And it's just really important, because often, like, the first question that's asked is, well, what happened? So I told you what happened. I probably shouldn't have told you, well, what happened, but, you can ask me questions. But generally, so the first question is, well, what happened? Next question is to the actors, well, how do you feel? What does it mean to do this? And so there's all sorts of things come up. People draw links to the Northern Territory intervention. People draw links, and I'll talk about this in a moment, between one of the key witnesses, Edward Kerr, and a more recent case. People do go in all sorts of directions with the Q&A, and it's a really always very fruitful and a very important aspect of it, and something that we as researchers felt was very, very important. If we're creating this meeting point, this public space, we really want to make sure that we fill that out, and it's a very rich space for appreciation, for collaboration, for discussion of what next, where do we go to from here. So that's the two. So the performance it brings together a cast of 4 Aboriginal and 5 non-Aboriginal actors, so it's got 9 people altogether. So it's very much, it's what the actors have also spoken about, it's very much a collaborative endeavour, the performance itself. And it seeks to embody this spirit of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal collaboration that the inquiry and the performance itself depicts. It's also, I guess, an important aspect to notice the verbatim nature of the evidence is important, crucial in fact in a context such as Australia, where there's been many divisive and destructive debates about the accuracy of what happened, of so-called revisionist accounts, so it's been it's key to say, well, this is verbatim, this actually happened. So having these public conversations in Australia has often been very, very difficult and very divisive. And so this is something that as a project we've been very aware of. So these are the two commissioners that we, and they've always been the same. That's Liz Jones, who's the CEO and Artistic Director of La Mama Theatre. And these two actors have been the commissioners in all of the performance, which has been wonderful to watch throughout all the seasons. And this is a statement by Melody Reynolds Diarra, who has also been, she's an Indigenous actor who has performed in many, she's played a number of roles in Corridor, we will show the country. And this is in a piece that we co-wrote together. And she writes up there, I'm passionate about theatre as a medium because it is true to storytelling, where a human being is standing in front of another human being, sharing the air, emotion and wisdom. In Corridor, the story that is told takes both the audience and performer on a journey that connects the present to the past, thereby creating a better understanding of our history. And she goes on to say that the honour of recreating Corridor is both nervous and exhilarating, knowing that their descendants are in the audience watching. I feel the responsibility to be almost a conduit, where the challenge was to put aside my modern day attitudes and thoughts and let the words tell the story. Doing this, the audience is given the opportunity to form their own impression of the depicted events. So the theatre clearly acts and is designed to act as a meeting point for audience members and for actors. So the audience who collectively experience the performance is brought together to hear and respond to the claims for justice articulated as part of the 1881 inquiry and the injustices of which they speak. So in performance, Corridor, we will show the country, reenacts the past and allows audience members to experience the past in the present, and facilitating that direct connection between contemporary audiences and historical events, and providing grounds for links between what went on then and what's happening today, and how would we like it to be different in the future. So the testimonies I've mentioned, really we can see it as carving out a space of resistance to colonial rule and articulating a possible way forward as to how it may be otherwise. So when Alice Grant told the inquiry she no longer did the ironing for Mrs. Strickland, the wife of the manager of Corridor, due to her not receiving any wages for doing it, and in response to the question, "You do not believe in working for nothing," replied no, she clearly put on record the inequity of the failure to pay wages for work done by Aboriginal people, which had been a decision by the Board of Protection. And Tommy Mitchie's letter to the inquiry, "I think they have done enough in this country to ruin the natives without taking it from us anymore," while testifying to the poor management of the station since John Breen had been forced out, took the inquiry from being about conditions on the station to the heart of dispossession. What I want to do now is just play you these just 4 excerpts of these 4 different testimonies. And this was produced last year. It's a DVD that was produced last year for Department of Education in order to be used as a key part of the teaching resource for secondary schools. And the idea is that, as you'll see when I bring it up, that teachers will be able to choose different testimonies to use as a teaching resource. And we can see, and I've sort of organised in that way for this purpose, was that the testimony from this inquiry gives us a real insight clearly into the practices of structural discrimination that continue today. They also demonstrate the shared concerns about justice and the collaboration that existed. So what we'll do is I'll put the DVD up, and then we'll look at Caroline Morgans to start with, who's a Jaja Warren woman and a mother and Corridor resident.
Mrs. Caroline Morgan, Aboriginal, examined. Have you been long here?
17 years, I think I am.
Where do you come from?
Loddon.
Have you any children?
3 living now.
Have you a hut?
Yes.
Is it warm?
It's not fine. The wind comes in. We had to line my bedroom with bags.
Say anything you have to say. Do not be frightened.
This is my evidence. Corranderk, November 16th, 1881. I have asked Mrs. Strickland for a pair of blankets for my sick boy. She told me that she must write to Captain Page first. Then I told her, must my little boy be perishing with the cold till you get a letter from Mr. Captain Page? She told me she had orders only to give a pair of blankets for every hut. Then I told her, what must I do? I have 3 beds.
How did you go for a blanket for your dying boy?
I had to have words over it. I have 2 beds, and the children cannot sleep together on account of one of them having a chest complaint. So I tore the blanket in 2. I gave them my blankets along with it. This is my evidence.
And the next is Edward Kerr, who was a member of the Board for the Protection of Aborigines and a key squatter settler in the area.
Edward Kerr, Darren, what are you?
A Chief Inspector of Stock.
Are you a member of the Central Board for the Protection of Aborigines?
Yes.
Have you ever been to Conda?
Yes, 2 or 3 times.
What was your impression with reference to the matter?
I did not think it was good. We all thought the place exceedingly undesirable, that it was impossible to do any good there. We reported that to the board and recommended that the station be removed.
You know, Conda produces largely hops and other things. The last 4 years show that Conda produced more than half of all the other 6 stations combined. Do you not think that a station producing such an amount of money is worth preserving?
The object of Corranderk is not growing hops. There is no doubt it is the most productive station of the lot, both of hops and discontent.
Do you think it desirable to take the natives away from Corranderk against their own will?
Anyone who knows the blacks know their will is nothing. They might have a serious objection now which they would not remember 3 months afterwards. They should be removed for their own benefit. I would not leave them to acquire habits of drink under the mistaken philanthropy of not interference.
Would you think it desirable to send the Aborigines away from Corranderk against their own will?
I have no doubt of it. They are easy to manage, provided they are not tampered with by indisposed person.
What kind of person?
There is a dismissed servant of the board who resides there in the neighbourhood. I refer to Mr. John Green.
Have you direct knowledge of this?
No, I have not. But I have no doubt Mr. Green has been plotting these 7 years to keep us in hot water.
And the blacks, not a particular objection to these incompetents.
I do not believe they have any strong objection. I dare say they may have been talked into such a thing. You wrote a letter the other day that caused a great dissatisfaction at Corranderk. A very improper letter, as I hear.
Read it.
Mr. Strickland told me of it. I have not got it.
That is not true. I have never written such a letter. I should not care if all the letters I have written were published in the Argus.
20 years ago, there were 4 times as many blacks as there are today. Yet the cost of running the reserves has increased by 17,000 pounds. How do you explain this?
I deny your proposition that there were ever 4 times what the blacks are now 20 years ago. You are quite in error. The first census taken of the blacks in this colony was taken about 5 or 6 years ago on a motion of mine at the Aboriginal Board. There was never any census taken prior to that. I know all about this subject.
The numbers were entered in the station reports carefully from year to year. In 1861, we read that there were 2,341.
Supposing you say 20,000, who can contradict you?
These are the board's own reports.
There was no census. I believe there are about 1,000 blacks at present in Victoria. It is estimated that there are on our stations 500.
Do you think that those blacks that you saw at Corridor would be better anywhere else than about their native ground?
Coranderk is not their native ground.
Not even the Yarra tribe.
Even they only went there during the summertime. They went there occasionally. The tribe to which Coranderk belonged died out nearly 40 years ago. They only camped there occasionally.
I suppose the blacks have the common human affection to places. Would they not form an attachment to a place?
No, I do not think so.
Did you ever consult the blacks on the question?
No,
Do you think that's fair?
most decidedly. For their good. If I saw my child playing on the brink of a well, I should remove the child, even if he cried. I should remove the blacks from Coranderk, whether they liked it or not.
Are they children?
They are.
Are they not men?
No, they're children. They have no more self-reliance than children.
If they offend against the law, are they punished like children?
No, like men.
Is that just?
Well, I didn't make the laws.
Should they be judged in our courts of justice as men and punished as men if you say they are children?
Well, they are children in some respects. But when they steal, they know they're doing wrong.
Do you consider it stealing if first of all you shoot down all their game and they have nothing to live upon?
It requires a definite question to give a definite answer.
You are aware that Coranderk is a permanent reserve.
Oh, I suppose it is.
Do you not think it would have been a wiser plan to have obtained first the sanction of the government for the proposal to remove?
Certainly not. Parliament has said to the board, there is the money, there are the blacks, there are the reserves. Make the best of them. Parliament can only know results.
Well, Mr. Kerr, is it good management not to have the station fenced in?
We didn't want to launch into any expenditure for fencing because we had recommended the blacks removal. If the blacks were removed, the station would be cut up. It would not be sold in one block. So our fencing would go for nothing.
Is not 20 years a long time to be kept in suspense about fencing?
Yes, it is a long time. But you see, the people of Healesville look upon it that they have a sort of right to Coranderk as a common. They believe they can use it, so our fences have been constantly cut down.
If Coranderk belonged to you or me, would the fences be constantly cut down?
We should have our remedy at court.
Is it not the same for Coranderk?
Government things are not like private affairs.
Has not the board persistently, for years, endeavoured to get the people removed from Coranderk?
Certainly not. Anyone to hear you would think the board had some personal object to gain. I deny anything of the sort. Just the contrary is the fact. I would have resigned long ago my position. Had it not been I saw those unfortunate Aborigines were going to fall into the hands of people who would not treat them well.
And into whose hands were you afraid that they would fall?
Mr. Green's.
Mr. Green again.
Hamlet could not be played without Hamlet.
Remembering this is verbatim testimony, and Edward Kurz wrote his memoirs 2 years after he gave this testimony at the inquiry. His memoirs were used just some years ago by Justice Olney, one of the highest courts of Australia, in a native title case about the Yorta in order to deny their claims. So the memoirs of Edward Kerr, and he wrote that he had a great relationship with Aboriginal people, and they hadn't, there was no connection. He knew who was connected to who, and his memoirs were used against the oral testimony of the Yorta people in the native title claim. So when we had the performance of Corindale River Show the Country at Federation Square at BMW Edge, one of the people in the audience said, "Is that the same Edward Kerr whose testimony was used, his expert witness testimony essentially, in the Yorta case?" And like, yes. So there we see just one aspect of the continuity. So the next I wanted to show you was John Green. He's scene 21. And John Green, of course, was his name's come up a bit, he was the original manager of Corindale. He founded Corindale to work together with William Barak and Simon Warner, and then was forced off, and we'll find out why.
We have one final witness, Mr. John Green, examined. You established the Aboriginal station in Corindale.
Yes, about 19 years ago. I managed Corindale for 12 years.
You currently reside at Healesville.
Yes.
You often see the blacks now?
Yes, very often. Sick people come to me almost daily for medicine and advice, sometimes as many as 10, 12.
Are you aware that they're all favourable to you and your management of the place?
Yes.
Did you find them good workers? You never had any reason to complain?
No, never.
How did you manage them when they disobeyed?
Reasonably.
You would not call in the police?
No, never.
Did you ever have to punish them?
No. I always treated them as free men and reasoned with them. I made a law with their own sanction and also fined some of them for drinking, but that was the Aboriginal law. And if they got drunk, they were fined. They were fined, and some of them were chastised according to their own law. If the Aboriginal is put into the question, he will strive to keep his own law. That is where I consider you.
Did you find them truthful as a rule?
Very.
And honest?
And honest.
Which of the two, the real blacks or the half-castes, did you find the best workers?
Well, I never found any difference. There were some splendid workers, both blacks and half-castes.
Do you consider the full blacks as intelligent as the half-caste?
Undoubtedly.
Mixing the blood does not improve the intelligence.
No.
What led to your giving up your inspectorship?
I do not know if you're aware of it, but I never received a penny for being at Corindale. My engagement with the government was purely inspector of Aborigines. For the first 4 years at Corindale, I had to pay Harris, the farm manager, out of my own salary.
What was your salary?
£300.
And you had to pay your own expenses?
Pay all my own expenses.
Did your wife, Mrs. Green, receive no salary as matron?
Well, I asked for something for Mrs. Green, but they would never give her a penny, and she had often the whole correspondence to carry on.
Am I to understand that you were not only the management of Corindale, but also the inspection of 6 stations at £300 a year?
Yes, decidedly. I stated I would have to give it up. I could not make ends meet. The first seed potatoes and the first plough I bought out of my own money. But we went on clearing ground until we had about 130 acres cleared, and I put in green crops. The first year I cut with the Aborigines 26,000 hops poles. The second year 16,000, also with the Aboriginals.
With only the blacks working?
With only the blacks working. And those hops earned over £1,000. That was the first wages I ever paid to the Aborigines. And I might say I had to write to the board several times for the money, stating that I had wanted to have this money as I had promised the Aborigines that they should have good houses erected for them.
Why did you resign from your position at Corindale? Will you give us your own version of it now?
I may state that on one occasion, Mr. Robert Smythe, then the board secretary, came to Corindale and told me that there were influences being brought to bear upon the board and the government to have the Aborigines removed from Corranderk, and he believed that they would be well inclined to give way. He said, if we give up this station, we will be handsomely paid for our improvements. He also said, of course we know we cannot move them without you. You know you can easily move them.
You need to be used as a sort of a decoy.
I understood so. I knew afterwards it was a fact. I stood and listened to him. I said, Mr. Smythe, I know that I could move the Aborigines if I could assure them it was for their good to do so. I could speak to them as men and brothers, and I know they would go, but I will not try, decidedly not.
And that led you to retire from the whole thing.
I think it would be most cruel to move them, because there is no doubt that many of the Aborigines who came there as children have been taught that it would be their home if they would stay and work. And I was sure no government would seek to take away that piece of ground if they would do their work. So I was dismissed because I would be no party to moving the Aborigines from Corranderk.
Have you in any way incited the blacks to move on your behalf?
Decidedly not.
At no time?
At no time. I think it would be cruel on the part of the board to move the Aborigines from Corranderk, and that is why I refuse to be party to it.
And the last one I want to show you is William Barak, William Barak is a key figure in the inquiry and a key figure in Victorian Aboriginal history. He was the clan leader, he was the leader of the Corranderk community, and he was the one, once Simon Wonga had passed away, he was the one who actually led all of the petitioning on the Governor of Victoria. Okay, so he is on the scene now.
William Barak, Aboriginal, examined. You were born on the Yarra?
Yes.
What part?
Yarra Flat.
How old are you?
I do not know.
It is a wild country as you were born.
Yes, yes.
Have you been on the station ever since it was established?
Yes.
You're too old to work now?
Yes.
Do they allow you enough clothing to keep you warm?
Yes. Every year.
How many pairs of trousers do you get?
One.
Do you get undershirts?
I have got a flannel.
How many of them do you get?
I've only got one.
Have you to go without one sometime during the year before you get another one?
Sometimes I go without when they are broken.
Do you ever ask for another when one breaks away?
No, I do not want to ask for it.
Have you any children?
They died not very long ago.
Tell us what happened.
My boy fell sick. Got 2 passes for the coach to take him to the Melbourne hospital. Had no food on the way. Mr. Strickland told me he would write to Captain Page to meet us at the coach station in Melbourne. Nobody met us at the coach station, Burke Street. We did not know where to go. It was dark. It was cool. So I told my boy we would go to Kew to Mrs. Bond. I had to carry my boy to Mrs. Bond. And it was late in the night. The next day, we took him to Melbourne Hospital. And I had to leave him there. He died soon afterwards.
How long since your wife died?
2 months.
Do you get enough to eat?
Yes. but it runs short towards the end of the week.
What runs short? The flour, or bread, or
Flour, sugar.
You applied for more when you were out.
We beg outside, people ask from one another.
Would you like the government to give you all the food you want and all the clothing and work?
We would like it if the government leave us here, give us this ground and let us manage Corridor and get on the money. Why don't the people do it for themselves? And why do not those white fellas who want to break up this station go and try to break up some of the squatter stations? Squatters have got more ground in Victoria than we have. We've only got one little piece. White fellas ought to leave us alone. White fellas would not like us to take them from their land and move them out of their homes. We are in Christian land and we ought to love one another with brotherly love.
Did you attend in town that time to see the Chief Secretary, Mr. Berry, when the deputation took place?
Yes.
What did you complain of then?
About the breaking up of the station.
Did you complain then that Mr. Strickland was not kind to you?
When we got down to Melbourne that time, we did not ask about Mr. Strickland. We asked that Mr. Green be manager over the station again.
You did not want Mr. Strickland to remain as manager.
We did not ask for that.
Do you want to send Mr. Strickland away?
Yes, we want him to go away. And we don't want any board nor Captain Page inspecting over us again. Only one man, and that is Mr. John Green. And for the station to be under the Chief Secretary. Then we will show the country that we can work it and make it pay. And I know it will.
So as I mentioned, these two-camera readings were produced last year, February 2015, by La Mama, by Social Education Victoria, which has been contracted by the Department of Education to put the curriculum resources together, and Giordano Nanny and the Minister of Evans Project, with acknowledgement to the earlier work done by Andrea James and Imagery Theatre. So this resource, this DVD is going to be critical to the 1881 Corranderk Inquiry teacher resource that's being established at the moment. So it's the Corranderk Inquiry Minutes of Evidence Curriculum Teacher Resource Package, which is being finalised at the moment, which is to develop 4 Victorian curriculum units for secondary schools. Levels 9 and 10, history, and levels 9 and 10, civics and citizenship. And it's very much to draw on the themes of the Corranderk Inquiry of resistance, justice, dispossession, empowerment and collaboration. So there'll be a whole series, like any curriculum, of online interactive resources and learning activities, including this DVD, and including advice for teachers and schools as to how to, in fact, to deliver the curriculum, including protocols for engagement with the local community and links to existing curriculum that involve similar themes. So there's been quite a process, of course, in developing this teacher resource package, beginning with this ongoing and early engagement with key stakeholders and the selection of 3 trial sites. So these 3 sites, Healesville High School, Warra Aboriginal College Healesville and Melbourne Girls College, have been were selected as sites to trial aspects of the curriculum by Social Education Victoria and the Department of Education. Imagery Theatre, in association with the Department of Education, did some student workshops in Healesville, and they originally developed a pilot version of a play, which would be for schools. And then Department of Education initiated the tender process in collaboration with us and Erin Birch, who, while she left the Department of Education, she came on board as a consultant to actually for the project to help develop this brief. So in this, the student workshops revealed some engagement books, which also being fed into the curriculum. So around narration, collaboration, it being a true story, showing empathy, demonstrating injustice, and that elders should be participating as well. So all of these have been fed into the development of the curriculum resource. So these are things that really captured their attention when they were seeing the play and learning about the story. So in August 2013, Social Education Victoria was selected to develop the curriculum, and they've been doing this in conjunction with one of our key partners, the Victorian Aboriginal Education Associated Incorporated, the Department of Education and other stakeholders, including the Wurundjeri Land Council. There's been ongoing community consultations and meetings with teacher focus groups, and there's a call out for interested teachers to be part of this. And we've had this trial of elements of curriculum with various important induction days, which have been community focused. And we're waiting to hear the launch date any day now, so it should be in the next month or so we'll be able to launch the curriculum, and it'll be up on the website, the Department of Education website for teachers to access and teachers to use. Just wanted to say a few words before I finish about a little bit more about the research aspect of the project. So as I mentioned, that structural justice and structural injustice are very much at the core of our project. And we're very much interested in the question of why is it that despite efforts at reform, inquiries, commissions, so on, oppression continues? So how do we actually get at structural change? What's required for structural change? So we're interested in further delineating this concept of structural justice and its relationship to structural injustice. So Mark McMillan, Nathan McMillan, Julie Evans and myself are in the process of writing this book, In Progress, Keeping Hold of Justice, the Experience of Law in the Colonial Past, Present and Future, where we're building on the conceptual framework of the project to really understand how law engages with the structural injustices of colonialism, and particularly settler colonialism, and to broaden understanding of how we make these structural injustices appreciable in the present and what role law has in that in terms of supporting possibilities for future justice. And as part of that, what I've been particularly interested in, and I mentioned briefly earlier, is this idea of reactivating the record of law. So we saw in the inquiry, through the excerpts and through some of the discussion of the 1881 inquiry, that we had this space carved out. So the inquiry was ostensibly meant to be, as I mentioned, about blankets, about fencing and so on. But what the claims that were made to the inquiry went much more deeply to the core of structural injustice, to dispossession, to destruction, to self-empowerment, to sovereignty. And those claims were made, and we believe that a space was created, we can see this, a space was created in the inquiry for the articulation of alternatives. We see this through the collaboration was put to the inquiry, and just alternatives. What could be, how could things be done otherwise? And so this space is maintained within this record of law. So yes, the inquiry heard for the residents, but then within a colonial structure, what can one inquiry do? What are the possibilities for structural change? Not very great at that time. But we have the record, so we have the record of law, we have the minutes of evidence, and we can reactivate that, we can replay that, we can reuse that, and that's what we've been doing through theatre and education. And we can then create new normative spaces through the fact that the record remains. The record remains, and we can create new spaces for appreciation of structural injustice and articulation of what a structural justice might demand. So we've been doing this both in relation to Coroner, but in relation to other case studies as well. So one that I looked at was a 1998 case that was brought by the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Canberra, asking that John Howard and various other members of Parliament be charged with genocide. And so they had a hearing. They had 2.5 days of hearing over a number of months. They brought the judge to the actual embassy in front of Old Parliament House around the fire. And they also carved out a space through the claims. So they were actually at the court, at the ACT Supreme Court, making these claims and making themselves heard at the embassy itself. And the judge, in fact, found that genocide was committed in the course of colonisation of Australia, which was really never been said in law before. He did not find that Howard and others should be arrested on charges of genocide, but the claims that were made remained. So the claims of sovereignty, which were put by Wadra Labina, who's there, and Isabel Cohen, who left, put claims of Aboriginal law as existing and surviving and being partner to this. The claims that were put forward as to we can work together, we will show you how. The claims that we have not ceded sovereignty. These were all in law and remain in law, and we can use these records. We can reactivate these records and use these for appreciation, for consideration and for action in terms of structural justice. So I want to finish just on one further, the last reflection on the project by Uncle Jack Charles, who you saw playing William Barak. Uncle Jack is a really really interesting person, very interesting history. He has a number of plays of his own. If you ever get the chance to see Uncle Jack Charles versus the Crown, I think it's been touring. It's an extraordinary piece. And he's been in it from the beginning. And I'll just get out of this and get into Uncle Jack.
Well, I've been hooked up with Ilbidry Theatre, Jack Charles versus the Crown. So I was in place in a unique position to be cast by Rachel. And it was because it's Aboriginal theatre, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander theatre, protocols have come into play here. And a bloke like me with my extended family up there, or my great-greats living up there as Coroner. So it behooves me to join this group and tell the story of Coroner.
Would you like the government to give you all the food you want and all the clothing and no work?
We would like it. If the government leave us here, give us this ground and let us manage Corandurk and get all the money. Why don't the people do it for themselves? It's important to me to realise that I have relatives up there who were agitating with William Barak and many others to have the removal of the station management and to be independent and to be have that land permanently gazetted forever and after as their permanent home. So that was why this needs to be told. Corandurk is the most important story because this is the beginning of a journey for white Australia. It has to happen eventually that white Australia will be, educated in Aboriginal history. Each state has their own stories, but this was the most significant. Victoria has set the bar here, the first state to invest Indigenous history, an important Indigenous history because it was the beginning of agitation.
So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for listening and open it up.